Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in today to America's home for conservative, not bitter talk. I'm still, by the way, out there looking for the left's alternative to conservative, not bitter talk, and I have wasted years of my life trying to find something remotely equivalent. They are angry. They are vindictive. They are fueled by hate. They wouldn't know something not bitter if it smacked them up the side of the head, my friends. It's a pleasure, again, to be here. I want to talk about two things today. Two things to the best of my ability, time permitting, of course. I want to talk a little bit about what is happening in Iran, this war, the tensions, some news that was revealed yesterday that Iran's ballistic missile capabilities have not been destroyed as much as we thought, or as much as Trump had said. That's at least being reported out there. You can take from it what you will. I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about this summit, this meeting between Xi Jinping and President Donald J. Trump. A little bit, just want to frame that and talk about the position that we're in as we approach this meeting, and really the fact that we're in a better position from a negotiating standpoint than we have been in a long, long time when it comes to our relationship with China. So that's where I want to head today, my friends. Maybe you've reached that stage where managing your money feels more like juggling numbers. Well, it's more than that. It's more than juggling numbers. You've got tax planning, you've got estate work, you've got investment choices, a whole lot more. That's when family office services can really make a big difference. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. Their family office services give you access to a coordinated team with advanced options strategies, private equity, private credit, and legal expertise. All those things, my friends, under one roof. It's about simplifying your financial life, planning for the future, making sure your legacy stays strong for generations. If you are ready for that next level of support, this describes you, then I encourage you to head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Okay, let's start with Iran today, my friends. I was browsing some headlines late last night or yesterday evening, and I saw a headline. Was it from the New York Times, I believe? And this is, it's remarkable to me. We're literally on the verge of potential escalation in Iran. It used to be said that politics stopped at the water's edge. In other words, American politicians, American individuals, we could fight about domestic politics a lot, all we wanted. We could have dramatic disagreements and all that sort of stuff. But when it came to threats outside the boundaries of this great nation, we would come together. We would come together and say, okay, now the threat is real. It is an existential threat outside the boundaries of this country, and we can come together despite our political differences when it comes to domestic issues. However, We're not going to let politics divide us when it comes to fixing these larger problems that are outside our borders, from foes, from sometimes complete enemies. We're going to come together and deal with these things together. And I've shared the example on here before. I'm old enough to remember the days, weeks, months following the 9/11 terrorist attack. I remember that time. I remember, many of you do. Some of you don't. Some of you were too young to remember that. Some of you weren't born yet, which makes it really difficult to understand that. You know, our children, for example, they were not alive. They weren't born prior to 9/11. Our oldest is going to turn 17 here in the not too distant future. And so this year is actually going to mark the 25th year since those dreaded terrorist attacks. And so the world changed a lot that day. It changed that day, and there's other things. COVID changed the world. There's been a lot of things that have changed the world. People becoming more of an enemy, at least here in this country, more opposed to biblical truth, the gospel of Jesus Christ. There's a lot of things that have made the world a different place, but 9/11 was one of those. And I remember it very well, and many of you do as well, those days immediately following when Bush's, again, it's not all about politics. I'm just painting a picture here where I forget the exact number, but the approval rating for President Bush in the days after 9/11 was around 90%, which is unheard of, right? It's unheard of today. It's you're going to have half the country upset at you if you're president of the United States today. The entire party that's not your political party is going to hate you and not be pleased with what you've done. And then some within your own party, because you haven't accomplished what they thought you were going to accomplish or do what you said you were going to do or whatever. So it's not an easy thing to do, but there was a 90% approval rating. And I remember, again, all the flags. I just remember how people treated each other. I remember an increase in church attendance. I remember these things. And people came together in this country. I think a lot of us, well, I don't know a lot. There were a percentage of us who understood that something like this was possible. There was a percentage of Americans who, I don't know, kind of thought America was untouchable. But whatever the case, it brought people together. And it was kind of a representation of what I'm pointing out here, which is that politics used to end at the water's edge. And we put a lot of those differences aside, and we realized that this was an enemy that had to be defeated. And so we came together and we did that. We fought. Of course, I don't want to get into all the wars and what things we did that were right and what we did that were wrong. Of course, we were not perfect, and we learned lessons along the way there as well, which are applicable, if you will, to this particular problem before us with the Islamic Republic of Iran. But the people at the New York Times, they never cease to amaze me. And this goes for not just the New York Times, but people on the political left. Again, as I mentioned off the top of the show, I've looked far and wide for something that is leftist but not bitter, and it's nowhere to be found. In fact, what I found instead are incredibly angry, volatile, just vitriolic people on the left, and they want to stick it to Trump. They want to stick it to conservatives, and that's at some level, my friends. At some level, my friends, it is 100%, understandable that they want to defeat Trump and Republicans. I get that, but this is beyond that. We're now talking about actual war. We're now talking about a maniacal regime having the capacity, the ability to have nuclear weapons. And again, I don't know if they don't care, if their hatred for Trump is greater than their desire to see Iran remain a nation without a nuclear weapon. I don't know if they don't believe it. I don't know what it is. It might be a combination of a lot of things. I don't know if they just don't take it seriously. You know, if you would have asked the average person on September 10th about some sort of a major terrorist attack that brought the United States, well, that I don't want to say brought it to its knees, but that rocked its world, I don't think many people could have envisioned it. Some could have. Some knew that we were in the metaphorical crosshairs of these radical Islamic terrorist organizations and so forth, but many people didn't. You know, it was just they didn't understand. And I think we're in a similar situation today. A lot of people do not understand what the threat is from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I've gone through this, and I'm not going to do that today. Suffice it to say that these are madmen running the nation. And, of course, we don't know who's running the nation now because it's believed that their replacement leader is either dead or incredibly injured and maybe even incapacitated. But regardless, the people who are running the show there are, first of all, they hate you. If you're listening to my voice, they hate Western civilization. They hate liberty. They hate any form of government that is not Sharia law, that is not based in Islamic law. And they believe, these radical lunatics believe that they are justified in doing whatever it takes. And that includes killing Westerners or killing Jews or killing Christians or whatever to create their version of, you could say, Sharia law is the simple way. I think technically they would call it something else, but you understand, or they wouldn't refer to it as the caliphate, but it's something very much like that, to where there's strict Islamic rule, and they believe that they are justified by God, called by God, to kill people who won't convert or to submit to that. And it's amazing to me how people refuse to learn this lesson. People on the left, some people that are maybe even on the right. This is who we're dealing with here today. It doesn't mean that we have to go to war with them, but I'll tell you this, it makes it very hard to understand how it's remotely possible for them to have a nuclear weapon. That should be, and this is the red line in the sand that Trump has drawn. That is something Trump is prepared to do whatever he can do to stop. And even, by the way, take actions that are going to, in the short term, inflict economic pain, which has happened here with prices at the pump and everything else. I saw inflation numbers are out. Inflation was up 3.8%. I guess, what is it, April up it would have been. So you've got all this going on. And I've got a headline here from the New York Times that I saw yesterday. It says this: U.S. intelligence shows Iran retains substantial missile capabilities. It says here, secret new assessments say Iran has operational access to 30 of its 33 missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting that its military remains far stronger than President Trump asserted. And fine, this is a report. Listen, they can report these things, but knowing what I know about these folks, knowing what you know about these folks, you know that there's a part of them that roots for Trump to fail, that cheers when Trump says something that turns out, and again, I don't know if this is true or not. I'm just telling you what's being reported. But they get a little gleeful over this because they would rather hurt Trump than stop the Iranians from getting a nuclear weapon. And that is hard to wrap our heads around. If Biden were president, thankfully he's not, I would want, and we were trying to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, I would want him to succeed. If Kamala Harris were president and we were trying to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, I would want her to succeed. If it doesn't matter, fill in the blank. If Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It doesn't matter to me. The politics has to stop on the water's edge when we're having an existential crisis here. Right? This is life or death for the free world if Iran gets... the stakes are that high, my friends. Again, they're talking about the complete and utter annihilation, destruction of Israel. And so this cannot be allowed to happen. And so it's interesting to me that the Times here, and that maybe I'm reading through the lines, maybe I've been... this is the result of listening to, reading the nonsense that they've produced, that they have released there at the New York Times over the course of many, many decades now. And I just am reading between the lines. But do they not understand that if Iran, if this is true, if they've kept, 90% or so of their military sites, if we did not destroy those, then do they not understand that this means something else is going to happen here? Do they not understand that we are, if we haven't taken out or severely damaged their capabilities to launch these missiles, do they not understand that something has to be done? Do they not understand that, again, it is etched in stone that Trump is not going to let Iran get a nuclear weapon? That should be the takeaway. That's what everyone, I hope, should understand here. Trump is not going to let that happen. And in that regard, everything is on the table to prevent that from happening. Now, he's used some, of course, restraint. We've not unleashed the full capabilities of the U.S. military. We haven't sent boots on the ground. I'm not arguing for it. I'm just simply saying that they have made the decision inside the administration. And by the way, you don't have to be in favor of war. I don't like war. I don't want war. But they've made the decision in the administration that if it requires an escalation in our military, what we decide to do militarily here, they have decided that it is effectively justified to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And you know the ballistic missiles are just one facet of this, because you've got to have the enriched uranium to weaponized levels. You've got to have warheads that can deliver the nuclear weapon, and you've got to have missiles that can carry the nuclear warhead to the designated target. And so this is one of those factors. And if it's true, instead of maybe reporting that Trump has overstated the damage the military has done to the ballistic missiles, and again, I don't know if this is true. This is just what's being reported. Your guess is as good as mine. But maybe they should spend a little less time hoping Trump fails and instead realizing that we are in a crisis here, a crisis that we cannot allow the enemy, the Iranian regime, to get their hands on nuclear weapons and the capability to deliver those nuclear weapons through warheads and, of course, deliver those through ballistic missiles. So, I wish politics ended at the water's edge. I wish that we could understand that this is a real threat, a very serious threat. I wish that people would understand that sometimes you're faced with incredibly difficult decisions that include two bad options. One very bad option and one pretty bad option, right? And that's what we're dealing with in Iran. And of course, we've got all that's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. We've got talks of negotiating peace, and then Iran puts forth some ridiculous demands and so forth. Again, as I've tried to explain to you, there's going to be a lot of this. There's going to be a lot of up and down. There's going to be a lot of head fakes. There's going to be a lot of just back and forth. It's going to look like the war is ending, and then it's not going to end, and that's just the way that these things go. And if you're confused about that, I highly recommend that you get the book, download the audio book or whatever. The Art of War by Sun Tzu. If you read that, these sorts of things will make much more sense. I don't know where this, I don't know what happens next. I just know that we have made the decision, the correct decision, by the way, in this administration, that Iran's not going to be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And Israel has made this decision as well. And it isn't because, well, it isn't just because we want to have them and we don't want anyone else to have them. On some level, that would be great, but we can't get back to that point. We don't want a maniacal regime who chants death to America, death to Israel, who talks about wiping Israel off the face of the planet to get their fingers on this weapons capability. And it is absolutely inexcusable, unforgivable to allow that to happen. I think Trump has come to that conclusion, and that means everything. And hear me say this, that means everything is on the table if this becomes, well, inevitable. If it looks like they have put the pieces back together and are able to get their hands on a functioning nuclear weapons arsenal. So I'm going to pause there. And we're going to talk in the next segment and throughout the rest of the program what's happening here with Trump's trip to China, Xi Jinping, Trump getting together. I want to give some background there because this is, of course, a relevant part of that. So we'll talk about that on the other side of the break. My friends, there is a lot of confusion out there about Kratom. You've probably heard the headlines, read the headlines, and most of those headlines are based on synthetic garbage that's sold by shady sellers that isn't even real Kratom at all. Real Kratom is natural. It's tested. It's handled with care, and that's exactly what you get from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. They're a family-run company. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. Every batch is lab-tested for purity. There's no chemicals, no fillers, no shortcuts. Friends, this is a trusted herbal option that's been used for generations, and it is a real alternative for people looking for something that does not come with a warning label as long as a CVS receipt. So do your research. If this makes sense for you, start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Coupon code Todd Huff will save you 10% on your first order. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, and yes, time out for me, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I can tell you here, the time you're, well, as of right now, when I'm speaking these words, I don't know when you'll hear this on the podcast or whenever you listen to this program, but as of right now, Trump has just landed in Beijing for this 2-day visit meeting with Xi Jinping. Now, they're going to talk about a lot of things. They're going to talk about tariffs. They're going to talk about, obviously, the Iran war. They're going to talk about just competitive factors between our economies and just talk about, supply chain, just doing business, trade, that sort of stuff. And, of course, Taiwan as well. That's something that, again, is kind of simmering beneath the surface, sometimes not even so much beneath the surface. So that's what's going to be happening here. And I want to kind of frame this. I want to frame this as to what's going on and really the position that Trump is in. You'll find some pieces that are written out there that are talking about the United States' position of relative strength here compared to other times when we have entered into negotiations with China. But Trump, the United States and Trump have more leverage than we often have had in modern times dealing with China. And so this is an important meeting, a very important meeting. So Trump, of course, is under pressure. But Trump thrives and loves the pressure. We, of course, have Iran going on in the background. China and Iran are relatively close. China and Venezuela were relatively close. And in the past several months, we've taken out Maduro in Venezuela. We've created problems for China to get Venezuela's energy, which is where they were getting a lot of their energy. And of course, we've had this conflict with Iran, and China was getting a lot of their oil, their energy from Iran as well. Now they're, of course, that they've taken a hit there as well. And so China is feeling this in ways that maybe they haven't. In fact, right now, the United States is increasing. We're a net exporter of energy right now, which is not a place that we had been. You go back in time not that long ago. This is not a place that we have been for a very long time. Trump has, of course, gotten us led. I mean, look, it's the private sector that does the work, but it's the setting up of the playing field that requires politicians, in this case, a president who is in favor of free markets and is in favor of us getting our own energy production up and to increase trade. And Trump has done a lot to help that happen. I can't go through that all here today. We don't have the time to go through that. That's a really deep dive. We just have a little time here left in the latter part of the program. But suffice it to say that Trump has done a lot to help make these things a reality. I mean, Trump is a supporter of free markets and domestic oil and energy production. Drill, baby, drill, right? That's a Trump position. And so all these things kind of come together to create the circumstances surrounding this meeting. There are, of course, concerns about the economy globally when it comes to things like wars and the ability for the energy market to be able to deliver energy, to trade energy, oil, and so forth freely without interference from Iranian vessels and the lunatics there and so forth. So there are some, a bit of anxiety, if you will, economically. And of course, there's a concern of escalation. I referenced at the end of, the first segment, I should say, was talking about reports that it's possible that the Iranian missile capabilities were not as damaged as Trump originally thought and said that they were. I'm not definitively saying that. I'm just saying that's now being reported. And so you have all this information, all these realities and circumstances and so forth that are creating the environment for this meeting. And, of course, the media will tell you that Xi Jinping has the upper hand and so forth, whatever the case may be. But the reality is that China has had a reduction in available energy options today. I mentioned that Venezuela, that option's been cut out. Of course, we have what's happening in Iran. Those are places, again, that they've gotten their energy, and that matters. A relative friend of China's in the Islamic Republic of Iran is in turmoil, disarray. It's unstable. Of course, we know what happened in Venezuela. Did you see that there was a headline yesterday? Venezuela becoming the 51st state. You've noticed now we've had Canada. Because Canada was rumored to be the 51st state. Greenland was rumored to be the 51st state. Now Venezuela to be the 51st state. And this just upsets the left and the media to no end. But the United States' presence and influence in Venezuela is, of course, very, very strong, and that's not helpful to China. Of course, we know the Strait of Hormuz is a mess, and of course, the just global shipping in general is there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. And China, you go back not too far back into history. And China was nowhere near the economic and military power that it is today. Now, for some time they've had a huge number of people, but they've had a mess, right? I mean, they've gone through through Mao Zedong. They've gone through some really wild times in China. And China is, listen, no friend of human rights, and they've got a lot of problems over there, but they've actually made some serious steps in recent decades when it comes to competing on the international stage. And, I would say it's the closest thing that we have to what I grew up with as a kid in the 1980s, which was two global superpowers. Of course, at the time, it was the United States of America and the Soviet Union. And of course, we know what happens. We remember what happens in the fall of communism and all of that. China has risen. I wouldn't say it's two superpowers, but it's more that than it has been in recent decades. And a lot of the way that they've grown and been able to get to the stage they're at now is they had predictable access to affordable energy, and they had they dominated when it came to exports. And the way it works in China, there's still the Chi-Coms. They work to compete and remain a integral part of global supply chains. Cheap labor, factories, all this sort of stuff. They want to be involved in the global supply chain, and they've succeeded at that for some time. But these pressures and realities are changing the landscape and the game, if you will. And China, Beijing, they're looking for some stability here. There's a lot of factors now that are concerning from the Chinese perspective. Again, the access to energy is a big part of that. And, the United States economy has grown. The United States has grown exports. Trump is out there aggressively negotiating trade deals. And there's always pressures of that, tariffs, all that stuff. And look, Trump understands the geopolitical threats that this nation faces, and he understands how to bring people to the negotiating table. He understands how to get leverage, and that's what's happening here. A lot of stuff behind the scenes. Many of the things, Trump has had a direct hand in creating some of these circumstances. Some of these things he didn't have direct influence in, but nonetheless, the United States is in a strong position. Stronger position today than they probably have been in quite some time as it pertains to negotiations with China. So I'll get a pause because we're getting to the end of this segment here. Friends, let's talk about something that is important. That's your money. You worked hard for it, but is your money working hard for you and what you believe in? At 48 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith and your values. They'll help create a plan that fits your goals, your purpose. And the best part is that they will show you how your current investments stack up against your values. And the way you figure that out is simply by heading on over to 48financial.com/Todd. Again, that's 48financial.com/Todd. Take a quick and easy assessment, and you can see to what degree your investments align with your current investments align with your values. 48 Financial, helping you align your money with your mission. I'm taking a time out here, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third final segment, talking here about what's happening, kind of setting the framework here for the next couple of days when Trump is meeting with Xi Jinping, and we've kind of laid out a little bit about what's going on here. And so there's a lot of things to discuss. I mentioned energy. I mentioned the Iran war, which we talked about at the beginning. The issue of tariffs, that's out there as well. I saw an appeals court. I just read a headline about an appeals court making a ruling that's allowing the tariffs to still be collected. There's there's a positive if you want to look at tariffs again. It's not the point of the discussion today, but there's legal fights over tariffs. And so an appeals court had recently ruled in Trump's favor on one of these things. He's lost some legal challenges. So we're still working through some of this, but that's inevitably going to be part of the conversation as well. But another part of this is Taiwan. China and Taiwan, it's a very precarious and delicately balanced situation. It is expected, unfortunately, by many people who know a lot about, of course, China and Taiwan and so forth. It is expected that at some point China is going to make a move on Taiwan. Taiwan is independent, but China says you really belong to us, and there's a point in time when it's assumed that China is actually going to act on that. I mean, China's done some wild things. I mean, they've actually they build islands in the South China Sea, because what happens is they're trying to cut off shipping lanes. They're trying to eliminate international waters and make those waters Chinese waters. And this is just one example of something that China's done. So they build islands in the South China Sea because a nation's what do I want to say? Their territorial waters extend a certain number of miles from the shoreline. I forget the exact number. It's, I don't know, 7 or so miles, 10 miles, something like that. And so you build islands, and theoretically, you could shut off a whole corridor of international shipping lanes, international waters, by simply placing your islands in a certain position. So if you put your islands close enough together and make them, right? You dump stuff down there, you pile it up, you say, oh, look, we got an island here, that's Chinese territory, so we have the waters this far from the shoreline become our territorial waters, and suddenly they can cut off shipping lanes and control that. And when you factor in what's happening, with shipping around the world, you think about the Strait of Hormuz, you think about the role that China has in exports, how many things that are being produced in China and then shipped out. Getting to international waters is a big deal for people who are trying to engage in commerce across the high seas. And if they're in territorial waters of China, China can control that. China can begin to increase the cost of passing through those waters. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen there, right? You can take away at some point, if this is accepted as reality, you take away, say, the United States Navy's ability to travel these waters, and there's been some contention here in years past. These are the sorts of things that are happening, and China's trying to grow its military power, of course, and their economic power, as most nations are. But there's a great distrust for the Chinese government, especially the Chi-Coms, and you factor in the issue with Taiwan. The United States. What's the United States going to do, if anything, when it comes to protecting Taiwan if China should take action here? So there's a lot of issues. Some of them will be directly discussed. Some of them will be may not be discussed in much detail, but all these things are beneath the surface, or sometimes out in the open, sometimes beneath the surface. These are all factors into this overall relationship with China. And I just want to say what Trump is doing to change the landscape and the environment of surrounding these talks and negotiations. I am of the opinion, I'm in agreement with those who are saying the United States is in a stronger position because of Trump's leadership, because of some of these things that he's been willing to do. Sometimes it's even short-term pain, but long-term, we're in a much better position here. And when you think about what the stakes are, I mean, these decisions could prevent future war over Taiwan. These decisions could impact how long what happens in Iran continues to happen. I mean, these are high stake talks. It could talk about it could impact the way that tariffs are being applied and economic pressures here at home. These are very important. We've made great strides in improving our negotiating position, in large part thanks to Trump. We'll see where these goes. See where this goes. The music is telling me it's time to wrap up, though, folks. Got to go. SDG.